and bring luminaries from film, theater, television, and music here for a weekend of Times Talks and premiere film screenings like this one. Tonight's Times Talks discussion of the documentary Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry, which made its Spanish debut here today. The film was first seen at the 2012 Sundance Film Festival, where it won a special jury prize for Spirit of Defiance. We are thrilled to have the director of this fascinating documentary here tonight to talk about her film and its subject with New York Times media columnist David Carr, who many of you may know not only for his columns and profiles of cultural figures in the New York Times and on nytimes.com, but also as a character, his own, in the film Page One, A Year Inside the New York Times. So please join us in welcoming David Carr and our guest, the director of Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry, Alison Klayman.
So, we're talking about a movie about a Chinese dissident made by an American filmmaker in front of a Spanish audience.
It's like the internet, right?
It is. It's very, very complicated and international. Disculpe mi español. Tengo las palabras, pero la gramática, no. No. But you know Mandarin, right? So how about if we go in Mandarin the whole time?
好，没问题。这边有人会说中文吗？有。
I know a lot of Mandarin, but I don't want to confuse you guys, so I don't know any Mandarin. All right.
The interpreter's just freaked out right
yeah, I
now,
know.
too.
Oh, they're going in Mandarin. Where is Ai Weiwei right now?
Ai Weiwei is in Beijing right now, where he has been, since he was detained last year, April 3rd, certainly since he was released June 22nd of 2011. There was a chance at one point that, and this isn't necessarily by his choice, he's been invited to many shows and have many engagements around the world since he's been released, but of course the government is still holding his passport. And we've really passed the date when they originally said they were going to give it back, which was a year from his release. So, I don't know anyone who has good information about, when we can expect that, Weiwei included.
But are you guys in touch?
Yeah, text messaging, Twitter, and the occasional phone call is how we stay in touch. Hopefully there's people tweeting about this right now. Every day, I've always felt like it wasn't totally necessary to have like a digest, oh, the movie opened here today and there, because I find out things from Twitter about, when the movie is opening in a different country or city, because people, they tweet their reactions and they often tag Weiwei. So if you're doing that today, it's at AIWW. And actually, there's even friends from Twitter that I know are here. There's someone from the Free Ai Weiwei blog. I don't know because we've never met in person, and the lights are really bright, but maybe,
show yourself.
Maybe they'll find me afterwards, but it's Free AIWW, the Twitter feed.
Who is it?
Is here in Madrid.
Wait, está aquí?
In any case, it's really hard
They're
to
hiding.
But maybe they prefer to remain anonymous, I don't know. But we were tweeting about how they were coming today. So it's really this thing where people who tweet also in Chinese all over the world, I find out where they're located because suddenly someone I know from Twitter is organizing a group to go see the film in Sydney, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that person lived in Australia. So it is a film, I think, that because of the nature of its subject, both Ai Weiwei and the internet and the use of social media and its possibilities, it ends up being something that is really part of the life of the film as it's traveling around the world.
So I fly into Madrid, and then someone lets me know the director of the film that I'm going to be talking about is here, and they point toward you, and I walk over to meet the amazing young assistant of the director of... It's you! How old are you?
I'm 27.
Wow. So, I'm thinking more as a parent than as a journalist, and I'm thinking I have a filmmaker daughter as well. She's
awesome.
More of a video person, but what I would think if she called me and I say, my daughter was in China, and I say, well, what are you doing, honey? And she said, well, I'm following around the dissident that Chinese authorities consider to be one of the most dangerous people in the world. Muy peligroso. Did your parents freak out?
Well, I think one of the often repeated answers I found myself using is it was all gradual. It happened over time. So I feel like the initial thing first was telling my parents that a 5-month trip was going to be a little longer. I ended up living there for 4 years. I didn't know at the outset that's what was going to happen. And when I started filming with Weiwei, it was for an exhibition of his. It was an exhibition of his New York photographs that were shown in Beijing at the end of 2008. And I gotta say, I mean, as you see in the film, who Weiwei is now is a product of his entire life, his worldview that's, been shaped by art and politics and his time, living in New York, living in China, his family. But it's also been shaped in the last few years. Like specifically what he is now has to do with the internet and has to do with the events of the last few years that you really get to see in the film. So I gotta say, when it started, I wasn't filming China's, most dangerous man or anything like that. I was filming an artist. He had designed the Olympic Stadium. He had spoken out about it.
The bird's nest.
Yeah, he designed the bird's nest
and disavowed it.
Yeah, but at the same time, he was traveling the world freely. At the time, he still had this blog where he was saying like eyebrow-raising things every day. You were like, one of the things I asked him within the first week was, how are you able to do what you do? Like, how are you not in jail? So that was the obvious question at the beginning, but it wasn't like, oh man, you're getting into trouble. It was 6 months into that when his blog was shut down, when the police installed surveillance cameras outside his door. Like, I saw them go up, it wasn't like that at the beginning. There were times I remember when I called my parents, and actually I got to ask them just earlier because they're here in the audience. I actually wanted them to come, first of all. My mom had never been to Spain or to Madrid, and I wanted her to see it. And they also have a big birthday coming up, both of them. So I just wanted to thank them for everything that they have done in supporting me. So if you guys can give a good applause.
It's so dark out there.
But there was...
Let me interrupt, though.
Yeah.
At a certain point, did you watched what happened to Weiwei and you thought, I wonder about me.
Well,
I wonder what might happen to me.
It was those trips to Chengdu where where that was the most apparent kind of issue. By nature, the whole point in the film, the trips that I take with him are these follow-up trips where he's going right to the seats of authority, the courthouse, the police station to, demand justice. He wants an inquiry, he wants investigation, he wants, to file a lawsuit about the assault that he experienced there. And, I think all of us were nervous on those trips. And I definitely gave my parents a heads up before I went. And they said, don't push it.
You did?
Yeah. But the main thing was, and if you'll find this an acceptable answer, but I really felt like the number one concern I had was that my presence wasn't going to negatively impact the situation for Ai Weiwei and for the other Chinese citizens that I was traveling with. Because the way I saw it was that the risk that they were facing, it kind of maxed out, much higher than the risk that I was facing. So I kind of put that first, and then right below was like, don't lose the footage, get the good shot, and like right below that was like, don't do anything to get yourself in danger. And I feel like it helps that I was living there, speaking the language. I'd been there for many years and was working as a journalist. So I think it's not to say just anybody go and like barge in somewhere and do whatever. I was also consulting with Weiwei's lawyers as we were driving around. They might say, maybe this location, don't come in. But again, I'm not sure if that was for my benefit or if it was because they didn't want to raise any red flags, like, oh, you brought a journalist here, like, stop the conversation.
Right. When you were in the midst of filming, did you ever think to yourself, well, this is going to end up being a very big deal. This is going to be a very big movie.
Probably not while I was filming. I can remember the moments when I thought, it's a good movie. Like, the day when his mom came by, and I got that was one of the first like really intimate kind of moments where I wasn't even sure if I was going to get to meet her at all, because as you see in the film, he's kind of evasive about letting people film with her. But she came and I started talking with her, and then it ended up being this beautiful scene. The same with the scene where they're filming each other, Zhao Zhao and the police officer are filming each other on the street. Both of those scenes, those were moments while I was filming where I was like, oh my God, like this is gonna be a good movie. But whether or not, it was hard for me to gauge what the interest was gonna be, because I just felt like I was so in the context and I was in China. It was really when he was detained, that was the most afraid I was during the entire process. And it was also, that was the moment when I just felt like the stakes for the film were so high. And I started to realize how much attention it had the potential to receive. And I feel fortunate, though, that I was just trying to do the best job. And I wasn't anticipating what direction it was going to go, because I was surprised when that happened.
I give you credit for, you kind of got in on a part-time basis. You know what? Maybe you should talk a little bit about how you got involved, just so we're clear.
Just real quick, so I went to China in 2006 with a friend from college. I wanted to do journalism and documentary film, but I had no experience in China. I didn't speak Chinese or anything like that, but that was where I ended up going. And like I said, it ended up becoming 4 years there. 2 years into it, after I had a lot of different jobs and I could kind of speak Mandarin and I was in the process of getting a journalist visa, my roommate was curating an exhibition of his for a local gallery in Beijing, and she asked if I wanted to help out and make a video to accompany the show. And it was one of those, it was like 20 minutes and it ran on a loop for 4 months in the gallery along with the show. And that was how I first really heard about Ai Weiwei. It was how I met him, and is how I began filming him. So it's good when people ask that question, they sometimes ask it in different parts, and then I just say, well, I gotta just tell this story, because that's how I started filming him. The first day I met him, my camera was in hand, and it was rolling when he walked in the room, and that was it. So it really is the kind of thing where
the camera loves that guy.
Yeah.
What is it?
That's how I felt in that first week, when I was like, oh my God, like I want to watch a whole movie about him. And I knew that the task at hand was to make a 20-minute video for an art show about the origin of these photographs, and it was very specific. But our conversations were very sprawling, and talking about censorship and talking about his feelings about the Chinese government, talking about his thinking on art, but it was also just him. Like I wanted to follow him around while he made noodles for breakfast, and I wanted to see how he jokes with the young staff, how he gives people a hard time. I just wanted to see all of it. And so I very much felt like he was a movie star, and whatever was going to happen to him was probably going to be interesting, and I wanted to know more.
See, I get the part, and I give you credit for it. You show up, and then you decide to stay. Smart move. You stay with the story. Good for you. What I think is amazing is not that you got all this stuff, but that you arrayed it into a movie that really is a movie. It's got everything you want in a film. It's got stakes, it's full of drama, it's well cast, and it's super, super exciting. I'm trying to figure out how you knew how to make a movie, not shoot it. You stayed, you were tough, you were smart. But how'd you know how to make such a good movie?
Well, it's always a hard question to answer, because part of it's got to be just whatever instinct I had, because I didn't go to film school, and so there's no this.
Probably a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love watching movies. I love watching anything, really, and especially things that are documentary or even reality shows, which aren't really reality. But I'm always thinking about why things were done the way they were and how they got certain shots. But I guess with this movie, I think part of why it is what it is because I had a subject who was very well covered in sort of in other spheres. In journalism, he's often quoted, and there are lots of stories about him, but I saw the ways they were lacking. And so in a lot of ways, I felt like this was an answer to the treatment he'd received in short-form journalism, or where you just don't have enough time. I mean, it's like not even a deficiency of reporting, it's like a deficiency of time and space to really render a person as a real person. And then I feel like within the art context, he's covered, but it's for a different reason too. And what's so vital about him over these last few years, the art is everything. I mean, it's not just within a fine art context where his art is taking place. So
Right.
He just demanded this holistic view. So I feel like, and I was fortunate enough that there ended up being real drama. I mean, I approached it like a character profile, maybe, but I wanted to do it really well. And then there was drama, so I felt like, okay, now you're obligated to make it, to show the drama.
Well, he was willing to play ball. If you think of it, he lets you see into his artistic process. He lets you see that much of the work is fabricated, not by him, but by other people. You get to see him, one of my favorite scenes is him and the pastrami sandwiches at Carnegie Deli.
Yeah.
It's like they're almost synonymous with freedom. And he wants to just pack them away and eat them in big gulps. That his time in the U.S., for whatever shortcomings the U.S. has, which is significant, that he saw it as something that symbolized freedom, that he caught a taste for being able to speak your mind while he was in the U.S.
And what I love about I feel like his time in the U.S., part of the reason why it's important, one, it's the freedom, but I would put it in a couple of categories. One's the freedom. He describes it, he often says, I did nothing for 10 years. And I think you could describe it in other ways. He did everything. I mean, but he was literally free. He wasn't, he was a stranger in the country. People didn't know who he was.
He didn't really graduate from school.
No, he really flunked out of Parsons, or
Right.
But he just lived life, and he was thinking and trying things out with his art. And I think that's got to be a really important thing for an artist, to be able to have a period where nobody's watching you that closely and you're really trying a lot of things and thinking about things. And the other freedom is the protests that he, when you look at his New York photographs, this body of over 10,000 photos that he took.
Many of them protest photos from Tompkins Square.
Oh my God, it was the majority, it felt like half of them, over 10 years, half of them were protest events around Tompkins Square Park or ACT UP protests. The ratio was very skewed, how much he enjoyed when he'd be out there, he'd shoot rolls and rolls. And it was about individual citizens coming up against police. They're both very prominent in the photos. And I feel like that's also why I kind of know I don't think he has too rosy of a view of the US either, because he saw it as the place where he learned about, it's great to be able to protest and use your voice, but also there's a lot to protest about, and it's about the struggle of the individual up against the state, I think, is what he really saw.
You think of artists as people who are alone with the work and think about it and ruminate, and Weiwei's not that way. He's a leader in a way, just even apart from the political activities. If you think of the execution of his work, how many backpacks in Berlin?
It was 9,000.
9,000 backpacks. had to be hung in a range. And then how many sunflower seeds?
They say 100 million.
I don't believe that.
Well, I just don't know how you would count that. I think
Don't you think that's hype, though?
Yeah.
Who can make 100 million?
What they did was they made the most they could make in time for the show.
Yeah. And then called it 100 million.
And it was a lot. I can't verify the number.
I say it's 100 million.
And I mean, it's all like that. I think part of it is always being a commentary on what's one of the things also that you think about when people think about China, even when you're in China or from afar, you think of just masses, right? You think of scale.
Billions and billions.
You think of scale,
Right.
Things that are done there can be done really big. They can, and so he brought 1,001 Chinese people. This wasn't in the film because he made his own 3.5-hour film about it, but he brought 1,001 Chinese people to Kassel, Germany for the art show Documenta.
Right.
Also brought 1,001 Ming and Qing Dynasty chairs that he had sort of refurbished.
Right.
So there is always there's something about it. I also think there's almost like something a little OCD. He's like, I got to count the names, I got to get the information, and he really tries to keep it well. But it
but there is, in the instance of the earthquake victims, that kind of autodidactism, the fascination with numbers, with accounting, turned out to be very important because the government was unwilling to really put a name or a number.
It was about the names, and I think that's what it always was about. At the outset, the government wouldn't give numbers either. Right before he published his list of names, or around that same time in May of 2009, the government put out their own. They said their count for. I think they put out a count for how many children, died in schools, but they provided no supporting evidence. They didn't provide any names, So it's like, do you believe their number? Do you believe Ai Weiwei's? And which one is showing the compassion? The idea that these are people. I think I had a lot of people who I saw saying on Twitter, but also, Chinese friends or colleagues in Beijing, when the 9/11, memorial or anniversary would come around, and there's usually, I didn't even know this, I wasn't paying attention, but they knew that on television in the States, people were reading off the names.
Right.
And there was a lot of conversation like, why doesn't our government do that when people die? So it's really about bringing it to the individual level and kind of the dignity of individual life. That when it comes to numbers of people, that's kind of what I think he's trying to do.
So here we are in Madrid, and people are seeing your movie. Do you think that there'll come a time when people in Beijing will see your movie, people in Sichuan province, when
Well, one of the ways, yes. I think it'll happen largely online. I've been quoted in American media as saying I'm probably the American filmmaker most excited to have her movie bootlegged in China,
Right.
which got picked up and translated a lot, also on Twitter, and people were cheering for that. And that seems to be the way that it will get around in mainland. I'm really excited that we're opening the film in Taiwan in 2 months. That's going to be the closest, and we're figuring out, we think we might be close to finding a way to do it in Hong Kong as well. And it's also, right now, China, the China story doesn't just exist in China right now. So there are students all over the world who go to see the movie, who will buy the DVD or download it from a torrent. They'll bring it back, they'll share it. I just see all these ways that I think it is going to get around. I don't anticipate a time in the next however long that it's going to be, screened officially in China in any way. But I think that, fortunately, there's going to be a lot of other ways that it's going to get around.
I'm wondering from Weiwei's perspective, who you were to him in that sense of, he makes his own movies. It's not like his existence is not already mediated. So did he see you as a fellow filmmaker, as a fellow artist, a way to get the word out? He really, really gave you a lot as a subject, and I'm wondering why.
So the way answer to that question would be, like, you got to ask him. How do I know what he was thinking?
Right.
And so that is part of it. But when we talked on the phone just a few weeks ago, as the movie was coming out in the US and Germany and the UK this summer, he was saying to me, we were laughing about how, he was like, who would have thought this thing that you made is like, it's like a phenomenon, and you've got people talking all over the world about this. And he was acknowledging, that is not how we thought about it, talked about it. I don't think that's how he thought about it, in terms of like it being a great opportunity. Because like you said, I mean, he's gone and met with the editorial board of the New York Times in New York. He's
Right.
like, he's got the ear, he's got the interest, things he do. Besides him putting it out, mainstream media does cover him a lot. So
here's this nice, friendly 25-year-old kid from Brown. You say,
Yeah.
how about we do a movie?
And so I think the best way is because I was just there, and I feel like, and I've talked with other filmmakers about this idea, for documentary, it's not just about getting the access, it's about keeping it,
Right.
and a big part of my life was like also, I needed for it to be an easy experience to have me around. I did not make that many requests of him. My request was just always, can I come?
Right.
Other camera crews that might come in for a week or a couple weeks for a 30-minute television program about him, and they want to film him walking, and can you hold this sculpture
What is it with
up?
TV and walking? They
Yeah.
always want you to walk.
Yeah,
Will you please go in there or walk out there? And it's like, I'm walking around all the time. Why don't you just shoot me?
Well, and that's sort of, that essentially he was, I think, more obliging, although he's not that obliging, to be honest.
Right.
But he was more obliging if it was, okay, and then you're going to leave me alone, right? And then I can go and do my work if we do this thing. But I could not expect that level of cooperation to be maintained over 2 years, over, the period. I wanted it to be I wanted to get the story, and I didn't want to shape it. I just wanted to be there. So the way I always kind of thought of it, and I shot myself, I filmed it myself, I ran sound myself, I tried to make it as simple as possible. So when I would say, and I always asked, I heard you're going to Jingdezhen, I heard you're going to Germany, like, can I come? To the point where he would say, you're so polite, why you ask all the time, like, you're so polite, yeah, come, whatever, it's a free world, you could do whatever you want. And sometimes he'd be like, oh, it'll be fun. So I just think it was another person to hang out with when he was, opening up shows all over the world, and it was fun to have another member of the entourage.
But there was a pivot because, number one, your subject got beaten to the point where he ended up having emergency brain surgery. And then pretty much after you're done shooting, he is incarcerated for 81 days. And you immediately become the voice. And I mean, I didn't know how old you were, but I saw you everywhere, and I was thinking, it's a weird thing because what you made it, the gesture of it is journalistic, but once your subject is incarcerated, you're assuming a role of advocacy, correct?
I think so. I think in that case, those 81 days, that was how I saw it to some degree. It was about bringing attention to what was happening with him. And the hook for people, because why have me on the show, who am I? Well, the hook is a documentarian who's been following Weiwei, who's making a movie, and all the interviews I did, and I did do a lot, because there weren't that many other people who were available, who knew him, and I was outside of China, so it was easier and safer. Every interview I did, I tried to do a pre-interview with, a producer from a show, and I'd say, my thing was like, I wanted to know so I didn't say anything that could get him in trouble for some reason. I was always really just scared. I didn't want to affect anything negatively. But I always said, this isn't a movie promotion interview. This is like, we're talking about what's happening right now. And I was on Twitter and on Facebook. Our film also was providing, I think, it was a really good place to go for the latest news, because we were getting stuff from, in Chinese, in English, from the studio. I was calling people all the time. So there was something, I think, at that point that was a hybrid of like advocacy and journalism. But I think the film always, what I was really, part of what I was scared about, aside from worrying about him, was the film. I felt like the stakes were so high and we wanted to get it out there to help him, but I didn't want to throw it away. Like, I still wanted it to be a good film, and I'd worked so hard, so I was like, well, I don't want to short shrift the filmmaking as well. And fortunately, his release also allowed me the time to take that extra couple months to kind of tighten it up, because trying to work on the film during those 81 days was impossible. I mean, it felt like editing with a gun to your head, because you're like, every morning you wake up, what happened? Is he out yet? What's going on? I mean, it was just a
it's
hard
the
time.
end to my movie being written by someone somewhere else right now.
Yeah, exactly. And where is it going to end? I mean, that was one of the, a lot of things didn't change about the structure of the film, I have to say, because of his detention. But the ending, the beginning and end, there are a million versions of that. There were so many, because we're like, I don't know, are we submitting it to this festival tomorrow? Okay, what is the end if it's today? But it could change in a week, you just really didn't know what was going to happen.
We have to finish up, but one thing I wanted to know is what you sort of learned from being around this guy. Other thing I want to know is when he was arrested, you couldn't have been that surprised, really.
The way I saw it, so it was not an inconceivable outcome, obviously. Right. It was something where the risk, we all knew the risk was always there. And like I said, from the first week we met, I was asking him, how are you not in jail? It was like, knowing very little about him, that seemed like an obvious question. And he even said to me that week, he said, they told me, and this is in my New York Times op-doc, actually, that I did, called Evolution of a Dissident, because I couldn't get this quote in the movie. I couldn't figure out how. But it's like in the end of 2008, and he says, the police told me, Weiwei, if we want to get you, we won't use a political charge. We'll find some other reason. It's very easy. And he says, yes, I know, you have all the power. This is the story he's relaying to me at the end of 2008. 3 years later, it's like prescient. I just watched that quote over and over again, because I was like, this is exactly what's happening once they announced that it was a tax charge,
That he was somehow stealing or lying, and fined him $2.4 million.
Yeah, of which he's paid half, and he's expected to pay the rest.
The most epic thing for me was they build him a big studio, probably trying to buy him off a little bit. And then when he doesn't play ball, they just come a year later and just bulldoze it. It's a weird place, China.
Yeah, that was the first, that was really that was the first thing, even before the detention, where I thought maybe I had the end for the movie, and I thought, oh my God, this has to be in it. And there was a lot of little moments like that, and you had to evaluate. This is this funny thing he did online. Do I need to make it in the movie or not? But when they announced they were going to demolish the studio, demolition, it's a very emblematic issue right now in China, the idea that anybody's property, that it's a physicalization of, I think, the idea of like having no rule of law, the idea that it doesn't matter, you can't appeal, it doesn't matter if you're Ai Weiwei or if you have like a small, a small shack somewhere. If it's marked for demolition, it's a big issue for everyone, rich and poor. And then it was going to be such a dramatic physicalization of it, because seeing that building go down. But anyway, back to the issue of whether it was a surprise or not. I mean, and that's an example. I thought that they were going to demolish his studio in Beijing because they'd been threatening it for a while. So the surprise wasn't, oh, they demolished buildings. It was like, oh, they're going to demolish that one that he just finished in Shanghai. And the detention, too, it was this thing, he didn't live his life, as if they're coming tomorrow, and that was the biggest reason, I think, why I would say, that's the part where I wasn't surprised, because, you know, at some point it's like if they didn't come for you yesterday and like they're not coming today, you know, his attitude was not to live as if they're coming, you know, as if like in fear that they're coming tomorrow. It's sort of like in defiance of the notion that they want you to think they're coming tomorrow.
I think that courage is an overused term in art. You know, you watch the Oscars or even wherever movie awards are, and again, people talk about the courage of this or that performance. It's all baloney. We know that. There's nothing courageous about showing up and making a movie and getting... But this guy, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he was afraid. And you could tell, I think demonstrated enormous courage. And for me, he would have been just a name, another Chinese dissident jailed. And instead, when I hear about him or think about him, I feel like I know who he is and what he represents, and that's thanks to your movie. It was a great pleasure to speak with you this evening.
Thank you so much. That makes me feel great. That was the whole hope, you know, to tell
You've done it
someone's
again,
story. So
Alison Klayman.
spread the word. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, David.